Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
I think we'll get started. I am Dave Pierce, and I'm the Executive Director of the Cable Impacts Foundation, and I'm also the VP of Public Affairs for NCTA. And first, I'd like to welcome you to NCTA, and second, I'd like to thank you for your participation in this morning's briefing. Whether you're here in person or you're joining us virtually, and a lot of you are joining us virtually, we appreciate that. And so, no matter where you are or how you're participating, we certainly welcome you. Briefly, and for those who are not aware, Cable Impacts is the cable industry's foundation dedicated specifically to social responsibility. As such, it leverages cable's resources, including its platform, its technology, and its content, to empower consumers and enhance communities. The foundation's work targets three areas: the advancement of education, increasing broadband adoption, and providing tools for parents and resources to help their children appropriately and effectively use media. We are excited to be able to host this morning the introduction of a great new report sponsored by Cable Impacts called Wired to Learn, K-12 Students in the Digital Classroom, which was produced by the Center for Promise at America's Promise Alliance. We are doubly pleased that the CEO of America's Promise Alliance, John Gompertz, is here with us. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that also with us is Frank Gallagher, the VP of Education at Cable Impacts. As it happens, and I'm sure is no accident, today's briefing coincides with this year's National Digital Learning Day, which is taking place this Friday, March 13th. I'm sure there's a Friday the 13th joke in there somewhere. Sponsored by the Alliance for Excellent Education, this day showcases efforts around the country focused on using technology to enhance education. We're happy to be part of this conversation and the unveiling of this report. For decades, the cable industry has been at the forefront of connecting technology to schools in order to support and, more importantly, transform student learning. With cable as our nation's leading broadband provider, Cable Impacts gladly supported this important research, and with the resulting Wired to Learn report, highlighting exactly how this transformation takes place in the digital environment. And this report is perfectly timed. Across America, schools are in the midst of a technology transformation with significant upgrades to their internet connections and networks and major changes in the devices students are using. And let's not forget new digital content, online assessments, and administrative tools. Aided by the Federal Communications Commission's recent enhancements to the E-rate program, to the Obama administration's ConnectEd initiative, and various types of other funding, this transformation has the potential to change the way teachers teach, students learn, and schools operate. Technology such as cable's digital broadband platform and the resulting resources that ride on it can help customize curricular content, instruction, and assessments to support individual learning styles. They can expand opportunities for student expression and collaboration, and they can connect young people to relevant topics that align with their interests and strengths. Note that I keep saying these things can happen. But what's important about this research and the Wired to Learn report is that it explores and underscores not just how these things can happen, but much more importantly, how they happen. In order to get to the how, our friends at the Center for Promise decided to examine closely 5 school districts that have implemented their digital learning initiatives. To tell us what they learned, we have us with this morning the 2 leads on the work, Jonathan Zaff, who is the director of the Center for Promise, and he's also the Senior Vice President of Research and Policy Development at America's Promise Alliance, and Michelle Sedaca, who was a senior consultant on the project. And I can tell you both that John and Michelle brought great insight to the work, and were really a delight to work with. In just a moment, they'll highlight for us the key lessons from the 5 profiled districts. And just so you know how the rest of our time together this morning will flow, students from the Walker Elementary School in the West Allis-West Milwaukee School District will share their firsthand experiences in a personalized learning classroom. Afterward, the audience members will have a chance to ask questions. And last, but certainly not least, America's Promise Alliance CEO John Gompertz will offer brief concluding remarks. So again, a very hearty welcome to you all. We're delighted that you're here. And John and Michelle, why don't we get started?
So good morning. I'm Jonathan Zaff, the Executive Director of the Center for Promise. I'm just going to take a minute just to tell you about who we are as the center and really turn it over to Michelle, who's been the true lead on this project and really the brains behind it. So I get this really easy task today of really introducing Michelle and her great work. The Center for Promise is very much aligned with America's Promise in the way we look at young people. That we examine how do you create the conditions so that all young people have an opportunity to thrive. And that's to thrive academically, to thrive socially, emotionally, civically, vocationally. How do you create these competencies in young people so they can thrive as productive citizens in society? So as part of that, we're in a sort of a potential revolution. And it's this sort of digital revolution that we have in this country. So we took this as one of the conditions we can actually help to manipulate, to form, to cultivate for young people, this digital side of their lives. So we're really grateful for NCTA's support to allow us to actually look into this topic. I think we realized there's not enough research on this topic, and we hope there'll be more and more research to really understand more specifically the how. How do we leverage this great capacity of technology so that we can get down to the young person? With the center, we really look at things when we not only look at the conditions, but how those conditions are relevant for an individual young person. Because we know if we can get down to the individual young person, we can individualize those supports in learning and socio-emotional support so we can optimize their development. And technology provides a very unique opportunity to do that. But again, that's potential. And so I want to turn it over to Michelle now, who really will talk about this how she sees this landscape across the country and what themes have emerged, and really, more specifically and tangibly, is what's happening in these 5 different districts and schools that she spoke with. And then what's usually the most captivating part of this is to actually hear from the young people themselves. You know, it's great to hear from Michelle, and I'm excited to have her speak to you, but it's always much more fun to hear from the young people, and they'll be taking you on this virtual tour. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Michelle, who will talk about the report.
Thanks, John. Okay, so as a recap of the purpose of Wired to Learn, we were looking at, the goal is really to understand what effective digital learning looks like in school districts. And to understand technology's potential in the classroom, we analyzed existing research on its effects on student outcomes and conducted interviews with 13 district leaders. We also reviewed strategic and technical plans, annual reports, and media coverage about the Digital Learning Initiative. And today I will discuss our main findings that emerged across all 5 case studies. And shortly, as John had mentioned, we will hear from one of the profile districts. The 5 districts include rural Elizabeth Forward, which is outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Louisville Independent School District, which is near Dallas, Texas, Mobile County Public Schools in southwestern Alabama, San Jose Unified School District in California's Silicon Valley, and then finally the West Allis, West Milwaukee School District near Milwaukee, Wisconsin. These districts were selected based on their diversity related to geography, school locale, school size, students' racial and ethnic composition, socioeconomic composition, the type of initiative, and the duration and progression of the digital learning initiative. So in order to facilitate comparing the case studies, we used an organizing framework developed by our friends over at the Alliance for Excellent Education. They created a free systemic planning tool called Project 24 to guide districts on implementing digital learning. Some of these, the key points that they use are community partnerships, budget and resources, curriculum, instruction and assessment, data and privacy, professional learning, technology, networks and hardware, and use of time. While district initiatives varied, 5 lessons emerged across all 5. The first lesson involves the importance of carefully planning and investing in broadband and wireless connectivity to power digital learning. All districts systematically built their infrastructure and networks to power one-to-one or bring your own device initiatives. Districts also regularly assess their infrastructure needs as technology continues to evolve. So as an example, in Louisville, Texas, district leaders increased their bandwidth capacity over 5 years as they were transitioning to cloud-based computing. And then they spent nearly a year expanding their broadband and wireless access points to accommodate their initiative, which is called 1-to-X, standing for one student to many devices. The next lesson relates to providing ongoing professional learning for educators. This training is necessary to equip teachers to effectively integrate technology into the curriculum, as well as to prepare them to employ new pedagogical techniques. In Mobile, Alabama, district leaders emphasize the importance of systematic planning and staff training in order for schools to launch bring your own device within their own school. After districts worked with schools to plan the launch of this type of initiative, they then continued to offer ongoing professional development in person and now also online. School districts also restructured the traditional teacher and student role in order to personalize learning according to individual needs and interests. And then some school districts also changed the physical layout of their classrooms. For example, they would do things like removing the desks in a row to create more flexible learning spaces. In West Allis, West Milwaukee, the district created a model called Next Generation Learning. Within this model, multi-age cohorts of students pursue personalized learning and are guided by teachers who act more in a facilitator role rather than the traditional lecturer or expert. And the following quote from one of the West Allis, West Milwaukee district leaders I interviewed powerfully illustrates this type of restructured learning environment. She said, "We've worked hard to have teachers let go of saying, as a student, you must do this, and instead having a student say, this is what I'm interested in. These are some of the standards and proficiencies that I'll need, and this is how I want to learn it." The next finding relates to developing creative strategies. Profile districts connected with an array of stakeholders and also visited other innovative learning environments, such as in schools, libraries, and universities. In Elizabeth Forward, district leaders visited Carnegie Mellon University's Entertainment Technology Center and Chicago Public Library's U Media, which is a youth-centered space for young people to create digital media. And these visits then sparked creative thinking. The district leaders returned to Elizabeth Forward and applied some of these concepts to redesigning their own learning spaces. Building strategic relationships with higher education and the private sector, including foundations and businesses, also helped Elizabeth Forward secure in-kind and financial support. Finally, a commitment to systematically using data to improve teaching and learning is critical. While all district initiatives are relatively young, they all consistently draw on data to guide teaching and learning and to track student outcomes. So as an example, in San Jose, one middle school there collected data from student surveys and focus groups on its blended learning pilot program in one of its algebra classes. And this data showed progress related to student ownership of learning, as well as increased 21st century skills. Okay, great. So those are our 5 lessons across all districts. And now we'd love to turn it over to Walker Elementary School and Principal Tracy Fisher-Tubbs.
Hi, welcome to Walker Elementary. We are excited and honored to be part of this program. Hi, there we go. Okay, I am going to quickly introduce 2 of my exemplar teachers. They are the ones that are in the classrooms working with these children every day. So This is Jennifer Siskewicz.
Hi, nice to meet you all.
And this is Elizabeth Hatat. Hello. What's it going to do? The students are going to be talking a little bit about what it looks like in the classroom every day. I know they have specific things they want to share, so we can just quickly get started.
Hi, my name is Dominic, and I am going to talk about 2 apps that help us learn without having to use paper. The first one is Achieve, and basically Achieve you have to log into, so it kind of helps people so that other people can't get into your accounts, which is lovely. And Achieve helps me, and Achieve helps us learn because it helps us refer back to articles, helps us highlight, it helps us learn better without having to use paper. It's technological way to learn literacy. And then the other one is Dreambox. Dreambox is important because it helps us learn digitally, and it helps us learn because, well, it helps us learn in different ways by different things, and it's technological. It helps us not have to waste paper and trees. Hi, my name is Ella, and I'm going to be talking about Notability. So for Notability, we have many folders so we can keep all of our items from Google Drive and Sheets. This helps us because we don't use paper, and we can upload items from Google Drive, and it helps us learn and then take notes. Yeah, you can create many folders, and if you can remember where your notes and sheets are. I'm Amelia, and I am going to talk about personalized learning plans. They help us know what our goals are to get to learn stuff, and it's not on paper, so I guess it saves trees. And it has I will accomplish this by, so it can show how we will learn what we need to learn to get to the next level. It also helps the teachers see what we did to learn, and so they can check if it's good. We put our learning in our Google Drive folder for the same thing.
Show the folder where it shows what you've done.
Okay, so I'm going to go into Google Drive. So, okay. So here's my numbers and base 10 folder, and it shows everything I completed to get to the next level of what I'm learning. There's also a reflection, so it shows what I need to work on still and what I could do better with. And here's what I need to know and understand. So this is just saying what I need to just know to get to the next level. And then this is like the final project. We didn't do a final project for this because I guess this is math. So, and then this is what we should do at the end of this unit.
Hello, I'm Peyton, and I'm going to show you about a website called Pinfile Schools. It's a website that helps you learn about like other countries and their environment and technology and war and conflict, government, and more. And so I have a pin file from Africa, and I have to read about him, and he has to read about me. So then he writes, so he reads the article, then he has to write right here, and whatever it says. So I have to read about the environment, the poverty, technology, war and conflict, government, and then there's a final project. Right now I'm reading technology. I have to wait for my pen pal to respond.
Okay, that is good. Any questions you have for us?
So if anybody has questions for the students or the teachers.
Do we have to use a mic or are we okay? Can you guys hear us?
We can hear you, yes.
I'd love to hear from the teachers how this has changed your classrooms and your lives.
Okay, where do we start? So the environment and the students learning is all individualized now. And so again, where we used to be the facilitators of the academic, now we're more of the guides by the sides. We facilitate what they need to learn, when they want to learn. We help them learn their learning styles, what's best for them. We've offered a different learning environment, so kids are able to choose their environment, where they're the most comfortable, and we just help them and guide them in their learning process.
I think the biggest difference for me has been the students taking ownership in their learning. They are, and that they are learning at their own level. It's not me up in front of the class. All right, I need 32 people to pay attention and go to page 236. It's not happening anymore, and we need ways to reach the students, especially those reluctant learners, and having it be more individualized at their level and independent, giving them the leadership roles in order to do that. This has made it possible. Our environment looks a little different, obviously, but knowing that it's just one pillar of the next generation learning community, it's not just putting an iPad in someone's hand and saying you're next gen. It's not just, turning on a couple lights and putting in a couch. It's a multitude of things.
I wonder if we can ask the principal, like, how did you decide to do all this? What were the drivers and what were the considerations about making this shift in your school?
I can't take any credit for that. I had two teams of teachers that were working with a group at the district office, and they wanted to try it, and I was supportive, and it just grew. We saw that they were being successful, so other rooms and other teams wanted to be part of it, and now it's whole school.
Wow.
I'm curious how you minimize distractions when you're using the technology, when you're using iPads. I can imagine it might be easy to want to wander in one direction or another.
How does that help you not be distracted?
They help us not get distracted because we have something to do. It's more attractive than just staring up at the light. Also, there are seminars, and we need our iPads in our seminars to help us learn. And without our iPads, we wouldn't be learning the same way that we would right now.
Thank you.
What do the parents think about this approach? Are they supportive? Are they mystified?
I think our parents are, completely on board. When this first came around about 4 or 5 years ago, we involved the parents in the decision making. They were a partner. They have to be a partner with them. So they are, they have access to our Google Drive. They have access to the notability that the kids are doing. And so they are a shared partner within this learning community. And they're the big advocates for it. They want this. They're watching their kids grow, succeed, and be independent learners, and they want this to continue through the middle and the high school.
So we're here at the National Cable Association, and I'm curious about how the connectivity worked. For how long have you had broadband, and how did that all happen at the school?
We've actually been developing the infrastructure and the network here in West Allis-West Milwaukee School District for a number of years. And so each year we continue to add additional broadband to meet the needs. We started with just routers in classrooms, and eventually, went to the point where we can actually have up to 90 devices per classroom active. We have a bring your own device policy in the district, so we know that besides the iPads that the students are using, students may be bringing up to 2 or 3 additional devices that are hitting our network. So we've worked over the years to just build a more robust infrastructure so that everything actually follows suit. We have a information and technology department that really works with that infrastructure, and they've been really instrumental in helping us establish learning environments that really support digital learning. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's great.
So I'm curious to know the big payoff for this, because from a teacher's standpoint, if you're trying to personalize learning for a group of students, it would imply more work on your part. For the student, if you are now in charge of your own learning, that's more responsibility and more effort on your part. So from a teacher standpoint or from a student standpoint, if it's more work and more effort, what's the payoff? What makes you really want to do this?
The payoff for the teachers in this environment is definitely student growth and watching the students grow and be at their level and grow. I think, is it a lot more work? Absolutely. You're trying 3 different, grade levels or 2 different grade levels, and students are at, such a wide variety of learning. I think the collaboration of teachers and having the teams working together really does make a difference. If you're one teacher trying to do it within your own class, it is a little bit more difficult. So that's why the teams really make a difference in collaborating with your cohort.
So for the teachers who have been in classroom environments before the introduction of this kind of technology, and then through its ramp up into now where it's very robust, are you seeing a difference in achievement? I mean, it sounds like what we're hearing is there's probably an acceleration of executive function for these kids at their developmental age because they have to take responsibility for their homework. Are you seeing a difference in the final metric, which is are they better at academic achievements that you want them to be at?
I can address that. My dean just shared some awesome data with us. In September, our kids take the MAPS assessment, and we had 61 children identified out of 420 that were below level. So between RTI and this personalization that happens every day, we have knocked that down to 15. Wow. So that is incredible.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's great.
Anybody else?
I have a question from the special education world. I know that the special education world has been using tablets and iPads for quite a while, especially for children who have difficulty producing verbal communication. They're able to, communicate through images, things like that. Have the tablets made it easier to integrate a lot of the special education kids into the regular classroom, or are you still finding that they need to be held in a separate classroom?
We do inclusion. Yeah, we do full inclusion. So I think it's much better to have them within the classroom, and it's much easier for the students to collaborate with other students. It's been beneficial. Thank you, Mr. Dunn.
All right, sweet. Thank you all so much. We'll give you a round of applause from Washington. You guys are great. It was wonderful to hear from all of you. Thanks so much. So we're going to just take a few minutes and explore some questions. I have some questions for John and Michelle, but I'm happy for others to participate as well if you've got questions. Whoop, there we go.
I'm curious, Michelle, what you heard about cost. We got a little bit here, but I mean, we have costs from connectivity to hardware to software to training. We didn't really explore with the teachers or with the principal whether they have any special training to be able to do that. But just at connectivity, hardware, they sound like they had to bring your own, software, and then the training. How does that work for a district or for a school, particularly one that, as most are now, are under financial stress?
So all of the 5 districts receive the federal subsidy E-rate, which we had briefly mentioned before. It's the federal government program that subsidizes internet access to schools and libraries across the country. So all districts use that to access the internet, and also some receive funding to cover their wireless needs as well. And then in terms of other types of funding, 2 of the districts, San Jose and Louisville, had local bonds that were passed. So taxes were helping to cover some of the financial needs, including purchasing hardware and digital devices. And then places such as Elizabeth Forward really leveraged relationships with foundations to redesign their learning spaces and to purchase devices. And then lastly, some districts shifted funding from things such as desktop computers to purchasing digital devices, laptops, and iPads. So it was a kind of a range.
So I was curious, we got a start in hearing from the teachers about, these teachers seemed enthusiastic, but what did you hear about take up from teachers and from staff, and was there resistance and all that? What do we learn about that?
So the interviews did we did touch on that process is definitely challenging, and all districts underscored the importance of professional learning to really make sure that teachers are on board, that they understand the initiative, that they kind of know how to use the devices. I know in districts also encourage the importance of experimentation and kind of building confidence in teachers by encouraging them to take risks. And I'm thinking of Elizabeth Forward, where the district talked about, one of the leaders talked about having teachers have a plan B in case, whatever the lesson of that day, if it didn't work, then they would have another plan at their fingertips to use. But yeah, it is professional learning and making sure that teachers as well as administrators are on board is key to the success of the initiative.
I wonder if there's a generational difference also, whether for younger teachers this would be easy, natural, and for more seasoned teachers it would be more difficult. Did you hear anything about that?
That did come up. I'm thinking of actually West Allis, West Milwaukee, I believe. That did come up, that definitely younger teachers are just more familiar and adept with some of the technology. Yeah.
Okay. So JC, let me ask you, at America's Promise, we're most concerned about those young people who are struggling one way or another. And we've heard a lot about how technology might be helpful, more personalized learning, more engaging learning. But when we come back to this question of cost, the question that we've always had about technology is this going to narrow the divide, or is this going to drive the divide? We see this school, that's a bring your own technology, so what happens if your own is outdated or non-existent? I wonder how you think about these issues of equity, the intersection of the issues of technology adoption and equity in schools and in communities.
Yeah, it becomes this interesting dynamic because again, if you one expectation is that you'll have something to bring from home that you'll know how to use, one piece. Not everybody can afford that. The other thing is if you are able to have hands-on interaction in school, but don't have that echoed at home, what are the implications there? I think what is, to this point though, I think what was, very compelling to hear, even just, we heard just today, but also just in the report, this idea of engagement, of community, so people to be very aware of what's going on and for administrators to have a full understanding of what they're dealing with, to really understand their community, their students and their families. Because when they can understand who they're dealing with, they can understand how to best create that sort of technology ecology around the students. So they know that if we have students who have too many families that can't afford technology at home, how do we design better environments in school and connect them with libraries as a partner, connect them with other institutions and YMCA. Intel has been so great about building clubhouses, right? There's other places in a community they can align with. So it becomes this really collaborative approach then to say, you can't, although the schools are going to be central to teaching through digital learning, there might be other people in the community who can also then facilitate that interaction.
So Michelle, to follow up on what John just said, San Jose, near where I grew up, I know, much more diverse, much poorer community. West Allis, pretty middle class community. Difference, can you talk about the difference in adoption and how people are being sensitive to the issues that John raised about availability of technology and as you said, the ecology, right? So 6 hours a day at school, awesome. But what happens to the other 8 or 10 hours that you're awake? Is it being reinforced other places, or is there's a weird disjunction?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So in San Jose, their model, it differed a little bit from the other 4 districts in that the district created a competitive grant for schools to apply to for a redesign grant is what they called it, and the concepts varied, and so while digital learning is certainly a part of it, especially the middle school that I mentioned, where they had some great findings on progress related to blended learning, the redesign kind of can involve a lot of different concepts. The other pilot project with San Jose was actually integrating project-based learning into their high school. But back to the middle school, their initiative with blended learning, they purchased iPads and Chromebooks, and they weren't able to afford to have give a device to every student, but they had enough so that students could share them. And so, more to back to your issue of bring your own device and kind of what do kids do if they don't have a device. School districts, from the ones that I heard, they'll purchase a device and give it to a student if the student can't afford or doesn't have his or her own. So in that way, they've allocated funding to ensure that all students can participate.
But do you think that people are being alerted to the issue that John raises about what happens in all the hours and days when young people aren't in school? Do you think they're thinking about that?
So they are in that some of the districts talked about involving parents and having, let's see, I think I'm thinking of Louisville right now, where they would involve parents in the 1-to-X initiative and kind of offer trainings. Other districts as well talked about this. So to explain the initiative and then also kind of get them on board, but then also show them, perhaps they might need some training on how to use a device.
Right.
To then be able to help their children at home.
Interesting. Well, I have one more question for you guys, and then I would love to hear any questions that anybody in the audience has. So we learned a certain amount, and there's a body of knowledge about this. What did this study tell you about what else we need to learn? What's on the horizon? This is all gonna happen. Like it's at this point, it's inexorable. What do we need to know? If we did another one of these a year from now to release in conjunction with Digital Learning Day, what would we want to explore?
So the body of research that we reviewed really highlighted the need just for greater research in general. So there's a lot of existing research on especially post-secondary effects. So in colleges, what are the effects of technology on students there? There's a much smaller body of literature on K-12. So I would say continued analysis of research studies looking at how digital devices are affecting student engagement, academic outcomes, specifically in the K-12 sector.
John, I was going to ask you, given what you said earlier and your view and your concerns, what do you want to plumb? What do you want to dive into?
Yeah, I think building off what Michelle said, I think what's important for us is to understand, one is just the overall effects. We talk digital learning, and it's not just about having broadband access, but how do you use that access to really create the pedagogies that are going to be most effective. So one is we know from the report that the results are mixed. So if you look at broad analyses across various studies, it's mixed. It's not surprising because, as you heard today, there's going to be great variation in the practice. That some are going to do some just phenomenal work, as you saw in West Allis. They are, they've recreated their classrooms. They've had they've done professional development so the teachers understand the technology. They've created just a different culture in the school where it's assumed that this is the way to learn. In other cases, to do what they just said they've avoided, which is just put an iPad in the hand of a child and say, go to it, right? Hybrid educational pedagogies have been used now with re-engagement processes, and we've seen this in some of the organizations we've worked with as well. Some to great effect, some to not great effect, because there's great variation in how it's implemented. So yes, we need to know directly, does digital learning result in better outcomes or just as good outcomes for students, maybe even more efficient outcomes, right? So there's only so many good teachers in the world. How can we get more of those good teachers to more of the students who need them? But the other is to have a deeper understanding about what that secret sauce is. What are those key ingredients that are needed in the practice to make sure to optimize those educational outcomes?
We have a couple minutes. Yeah.
Should you find any correlation between the quality of implementation and who initiated the implementation? Like, I noticed the principal at the school said we had a couple teachers who worked with the district and they really wanted to do this. And then we expanded to other classrooms as opposed to maybe the district saying, now we're really interested in having more technology in classrooms.
Yeah. So districts did seem to kind of take the approach of kind of piloting and to see how the initiative would play out in a few classrooms that were ready to, or showed interest. So in Mobile County in Alabama, schools volunteer to launch Bring Your Own Device, and then the district works with that individual school. And so I think that's really important rather than just kind of top down, like pushing the initiative on the entire district, but really making sure the school's on board and is receiving the training it needs to actually be successful with implementation. Does that help answer?
So I two interrelated questions. Really at the core is sort of, is this sustainable in the schools that you looked at, and sort of are we making progress? Should it be? I asked for two reasons. We've seen studies of technology-rich learning environments in K-12 schools for over 20 years, right? So this isn't new. And so are we, are we learning and we getting better at this? But then there was also the question about, it was asked about funding. And two of the sources of funding I heard were short-term and sort of not built into the ongoing operational budget of schools. Bond funding and external foundation funding. That's not the sort of support one would, one can rely on for the long term for change. So I'm just curious, as you look forward in these districts and maybe extrapolating, further, is this a sustainable course, and are we seeing enough now versus the past that we should be excited that it is, or are we still experimenting?
Michelle, you have thoughts on that from your observations?
So yeah, that's a really good point. The bond is a short term. I mean, they are multi-year, but I mean, they're not going on forever. So I think that funding is an issue. It definitely is an issue and a challenge. I mean, in terms of internet access and wireless, all of the 5 districts do receive subsidies for that. And now recently E-rate was, the funding cap was raised just at the end of 2014. So I think those needs in terms of supporting especially digital devices, the wireless, there should be more funding for that. But yeah, that is an issue.
And it seems like it would also very much drive the equity issue, because if you are growing up in a technology-rich household, what's happening at school is one part of the equation. There's lots of learning that will go on at home, and you become very familiar with these devices and so forth. But if the schools can't afford year-over-year purchases and maintenance of machines, I think you raise a really important issue.
Yeah, and it also goes into then just a rethinking of what the educational environment is supposed to be. This is right to your point. That right now I think we are in this. Yes, we're 20 years in, but as we all know, technology has exploded every year. To something new, and what we're able to do today is dramatically different than what it was 20 years ago. What digital learning meant 20 years ago was you got your CD-ROMs for all those people who stream things, thing to disk, put in a machine, and do magical things. But that was a very different, less interactive environment than what we have today, right? And you just see the young people manipulating the screens in just ways that just blow my mind. But this is new. And so when we think about what are the right pedagogies, I mean, so what we're talking about here are media to use to facilitate learning. And the question then is, how do you layer on the practices to optimize those platforms? And so we still do have a lot to learn from the research side. Once we can start to show things like outcome, like true impact on educational outcomes, and getting those educational outcomes for a cost that makes sense to people. So we can go to your school committee and say, we're achieving the same outcomes we did before or better for less money than it took, because we can redirect funds from this very expensive way to do business to this less expensive way. I think that's when you'll start to see the difference, because then you'll see it's not about getting this this add-on funding from a foundation, from the E-rate, what have you, but it becomes a core part of the budget. But I think we're clearly not there yet. But once we can get there is when we'll start to see the real transformation.
Others?
Question. It seems like digital learning is a natural medium to spur business engagement. Did we see any sort of increased business engagement either at the district level, school level, classroom level, in any of the 5 districts?
Spurring, I'm sorry, business?
Business engagement.
Business engagement. In Elizabeth Forward, yes. The district, there was a work with a local company that produced games, and that was kind of an in-kind support that they offered. Trying to think of other, Elizabeth Forward I think was the main one that really emphasized creating relationships with businesses and foundations, and also higher ed. So Carnegie Mellon University that I had mentioned. They also produce games for students to use within Elizabeth Forward.
Angela, you get the last question.
Okay.
Make it good.
Okay. Well, first I just wanted to say that I think this is great that they're implementing digital learning in schools, especially on the elementary level. The high school that I went to was a laptop school, so everyone had a laptop and we used it all day, every day in school, outside of school. But one thing I would say is that a lot of my peers and parents weren't digitally inclined. So I'm just curious to know whether any difficulties in the districts with parents being able to adapt to their children learning digitally, and were the schools how were they able to tackle that and help the parents to learn with their children?
So I think that goes back to kind of when I was mentioning some of the parent training that districts offered. I think that kind of speaks to what you're talking about. In Louisville, they emphasize the need to make sure that parents were on board with the technology and understood it. And they would create videos as well. I remember from one of the interviews they were telling us about explaining 1 to X and then on a variety of topics. So that was definitely a priority to reach out to parents. Other districts as well. So that was kind of in the beginning. In terms of like ongoing support, that I'm not sure about. But definitely at the beginning of the initiative, districts made an effort to reach out to parents and have trainings and workshops.
And I think what's really important about this question, which is about how do you empower parents, and so they don't feel disempowered in these environments. If you just look at the way with Common Core standards as an example of this, for those of you either here or streaming in who are dealing with your children learning the new math, right? We are told by teachers not to. Please don't teach your child math at home. You don't know what you're talking about. We're doing it right here. Please don't mess with it, right? That's what you hear. That's very disempowering as a parent, because you're looking at this and saying, well, what am I supposed to do then? I'm supposed to be helping, you tell me to help my child at home, but then I can't because you're sick. So now take that even further with technology. If I don't understand the use of technology, how disempowering is it for me? And when you hear from schools that we struggle to engage with parents, and then you add this on as a potential barrier, how do you get beyond that? So it's an important thing for people who are initiating digital strategies to understand the need for parent engagement and community engagement. As an example, in Boston, there's an organization that's aligned with the district called Technology Goes Home. And they specifically do trainings with parents, and when you complete the training, you get a laptop to take home. And they teach the parent not only how to use it for your child, but also how for you can use it in your own life. So it becomes an empowerment and really community building opportunity. But I think those examples are too rare at this point. But I think that becomes the call to arms to say, how do we use the use of technology and digital strategies as a driver for engaging with parents? So it becomes this really important initiative to touch on.
2 points on this, Angela. One is, when our kids were at home and going to school, it was just so profoundly clear what an advantage they had because of the technology that was in our house. I mean, there were assignments that would come home, and I have no idea how a kid who had parents that don't have a computer, don't have a nice printer, don't know how to do stuff, how could those kids possibly compete? It was totally unfair. But this question about parents, it occurs to me, it's come up a couple of times here. Maybe that's something that we ought to be exploring, particularly around the equity issues, is how do schools that adopt technologies engage parents so that the overall ecology in which that young person is growing up incorporates technology. So thank you for all the questions, and thank you to everybody for being here. I just want to close by thanking people for coming. A special thank you to NCTA and the Cable Impacts Foundation for making this research possible. And thank you to John and especially Michelle for spearheading the work. I think what we hear today and what we learn about is that the way that technology comes into the classroom and really all the learning that young people do, it's happening, right? It's here. There's not an issue about whether there will be technology in the classroom, whether people will use technology to learn. The question is, how will that happen, and what will the impact of that be? And this was a great opportunity for us to begin to explore some questions associated with those challenges and with that reality, and hopefully we'll be able to do more of that. And I'm glad we've done this in the week of Digital Learning Day, and I wish all of you a good day today and a good Digital Learning Day on Friday. So thanks all.